What are your top 3 scriptures that convinced you of postmillennialism? And I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic because it is rooted and grounded in Scripture. For me and for everybody that I know who has come around to a post-millennial point of view, these are about like the arguments from Scripture is what brought me here. And so I am going to go a little bit out of the order that I put them on here because I think the first one that I need to say is Revelation 20. And that just sort of ties into our discussion that we had when we talked about post-mill, is that...
Before you get there?
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're about to do this. For our audience, what is postmillennialism? And this Revelation 20 gives you the perfect jumping off point for that. But what is postmillennialism?
Yeah, when does Christ come back? Does he come back before the millennium?
Pre-millennium?
Does he come back? Is maybe you're kind of confused about the millennium? There is no millennium, a millennium, and then or does he come back after it, post millennialism? And then, in particular, premillennialism had a historic interpretation that got refangled and jiggled around and is called dispensational premillennialism,
right,
which is unique in the last 250 years and is a new thing.
Very novel interpretation.
And yet ubiquitous in America. This is what most people think that, like, isn't the Left Behind series just a commentary on Revelation? Like that is the dominant viewpoint. So in particular, the only place in the Bible where millennium is mentioned, the 1,000-year reign, is Revelation 20. So when I got the Amil understanding, so first I was dispensational, just America, that Christianity, that was what I came into. And then when I started reading Anthony Hoekema, Bible in the Future, these kind of Amil sorts of resources that were being put in front of me, and then to realize that they were saying this is the millennium now, that the devil is bound, the nations are no longer being deceived. It's not that the locus of God's saving activity is just one country on earth, but that the Great Commission is going forth. That'll come up in a second. But it's going forth, and all the nations are being brought under the lordship of Christ. That 1,000-year reign, and then in particular, even Anthony Hoekema would say 1,000 is the sort of old world equivalent of a gazillion.
An age.
Right, yeah, a heck of a lot. It doesn't have to be, 999 plus 1.
Right.
It is just a ton, a lot. And so that, I replaced my warning in case of rapture, car will be unmanned bumper sticker with a honk if you're enjoying the millennium sticker. And so like I became Amil because that was the crowd that I was with there.
Same.
But as soon as I started then finding post-mill resources, and they said, yeah, your interpretation of Revelation 20 is exactly spot on.
What?
I was totally disarmed. I was just like, wait, okay, now I have to read all of these post-mill resources. And like, how can we agree about that and then disagree about the big picture overall?
Right. And so in the distinctive, probably the most distinctive element of postmillennialism is its optimism.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
So, and I've even heard it put, really it comes down to optimillennialism versus pessimillennialism. Right. Because even as you were just saying, even parsing out the distinctions between optimistic Amil and postmillennialism, I'm still trying to parse that out.
I don't know if it's necessary even. I think if they're there, then...
Yeah, I think a lot of people who claim post-mill are actually just optimistic Amil. I think it's become a term, post-mill has basically become a term that refers to optimistic eschatology.
Yes.
Is the way that I've seen it.
And because it actually does not center on what do you do with Revelation 20. That was why that was the gateway drug for me.
Right.
Is that then it's like, oh, well, then what do we disagree about here? Is that I had to read so much more when I found out that this is the best interpretation according to the majority of commentators, what to do with Revelation 20. We're in the millennium now.
Yeah, and it's rather unfortunate that our eschatological views pre, post, and amillennialism are named after the most confusing chapter in the most confusing book in the Bible. As I say confusing, difficult to interpret. Difficult to interpret.
Yeah.
And we've honed in there to make our case for our eschatological views. But really, the reason that I'm post-mill is because, Revelation, of course, that's important. That's a key factor in coming to our eschatological views. But here in the post-mill camp, as you can go see from our episode, we take the partial preterist interpretation of Revelation. But the thing that really convinced me of postmillennialism is not that, it totally, it's the best interpretation of Revelation. I think it is, but the reason I was convinced of postmillennialism was because it made sense to me of the most biblical data.
Yes.
And the overarching narrative of Scripture.
Right.
And really with eschatology, I think the reason the church never came to a firm consensus is because, well, one, it's really difficult. Each of the positions has problem passages.
Yeah.
Each of them.
Yeah. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. But it comes down to which one has the least problematic problem passages in my view. And it ultimately ended with postmillennialism had the least problematic problem passages.
Well, and there are so many other questions that you're answering first that are actually going to determine your view. Is that so many people, I think, at least from the reading of history that I've done and listening to like a Gavin Ortland or something, talk about why weren't people post-mill in the first century?
Mm-hmm.
Is that they had a overly figurative interpretation of the end of the world revelation kind of stuff. And so that now as a post-mill person, we would say the world did end.
Right.
And in AD 70. And so that maybe the influx of Gentiles who don't have the full scriptural picture about what does end of the world mean, that they missed it when it happened in AD 70. And it was just sort of like, blip on the news from Jerusalem. That they didn't get the full picture versus now, I think, Jonathan Edwards being one of the most famous new school of post-mill people to say, I guess the world isn't ending here. Is that like people thought during, the year 1000 Charlemagne, like that was going to be the end of the world. People thought during the Reformation, this is going to be like everything we're going through now with like the eclipse is going to be the end of the world. Like This is nothing new. Christians have been doing this silliness from the get-go and it just keeps not working out. So come back to Scripture and how can we make sense of what is there?
Right.
And in particular, my second one, if I may, is Matthew 24 and the parallel passages in the other places with the Olivet discourse. This generation will not pass away until these things have come to pass.
I believe it was C.S. Lewis who called that either the most embarrassing passage in the New Testament or the most difficult. I can't remember the language he actually put to it, but if you don't have a partial preterist post-mill perspective, you have to tie yourself into knots to explain. And what is that in the context of? What is that prophecy in the context of?
Well, and in particular, it's Jesus prophesying here. So like the idea that you're like embarrassed about this prophecy failed, it's not like this was Isaiah who, maybe he's just a dude at that moment. He didn't have a word from the Lord and he screwed up. This is Jesus.
Yeah.
So better be the best prophet ever or you're really, 1 Corinthians 15, you're up poop creek here. But the idea that this is Jesus standing, looking out at the temple and, this is not going to last. And the disciples say, well, when? And he answers, this generation will not pass away until that the sun is turned to blood, the moon to sackcloth, and that not one stone is left on top of another. And I think that this is super. What was the completely mind-blowing new change that I went through to become post-mill was to say he meant what he said, and when the sun will no longer give its light, if you have a particular definition about what that means and it didn't happen, Jesus is right and you are wrong is the correct viewpoint at all times. And the default point of view. And so you must be wrong about what it means for the sun to not give its light and the moon to turn to blood.
Right. And that's the passage where, pray that you're not, a mother who's pregnant
in those days. And you're going to have a hard time running for the hills.
And specifically, and even he gets very specific, when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies.
And you see the abomination of desolation in the temple.
But, you may be about to get into this. We can get into it a little bit, but there's some amazing extra biblical sources from the early church fathers on this stuff. And Josephus, if we were getting into we're more on the presuppositional apologetic side of things, but if we were to dive into the more of the evidence-based apologetics.
Which we get to have that one too.
We get both. Yeah, that's exactly right. Those become more comforts for the soul of the believer because, we're not haters of God. We'll get into presuppositional apologetics.
That's a couple episodes away.
That's
a couple episodes.
That's right. But there is some incredible evidence, like even I'm blanking on which church father wrote this. But basically he was talking about how Christians survived the siege of Jerusalem in mass numbers.
Yes.
Because whenever the Roman Empire was coming to conquer Jerusalem because of all the political turmoil, they surrounded Jerusalem for the siege in 69 or something like that. But then political unrest at home in Caesar's house
paused the campaign.
It. Yeah. They turned around. And at that point, whenever your city is surrounded by armies, what you do in the ancient world is barricade in the cities.
Yeah.
You go from out and you come in.
Yeah.
But they remembered the prophecy from their Lord, which was when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, head for the hills.
Right.
Run away.
Yeah.
And so God's people, God's new people, right? The church, which consisted of predominantly Jews at
this point, almost all Jews still.
Yeah. They saw this prophecy coming true and they headed for the hills. And so a huge contingent of Christians survived this because of the fulfillment of this prophecy. And they looked back to the words of their Lord.
And in my personal journey, like how to read scripture, this changed my hermeneutics so much, is that I think the kind of grammatical, historical, which is still useful. I don't want to discount that entirely by any means, but the idea that like sun will turn to blood, moon to sackcloth, these kind of things, it definitely changed the way about how are you supposed to be getting metaphor and imagery, and that how does Jesus use the Old Testament? How are we supposed to be reading our Bibles?
Right.
That definitely had a huge impact to be. I was wrong about the sun going out is the end of the fusion of hydrogen atoms to make helium atoms at the thermonuclear oven at the heart of our solar system.
Nerd.
And, yeah, I mean, but like how many of us think about, like, this is the opening to Through New Eyes, but like when somebody says fox or cat, and like you think about like the cat that you dissected in high school, and like what is the sun? Is it the angel given say over our lives that is, like that's what Genesis 1 reads like. It's rule over the day. A ruler that then now we are higher than the angels. Psalm 12 and the whole New Testament is like, that is the picture that should come to mind first if you're a biblically saturated person, as opposed to science.
An enlightened modern.
Right, enlightenment modern. Like this is all your, that book of those episodes of this show of like, where do you get your definitions from?
Right.
So that was a huge one for me, Matthew 24, Olivet Discourse.
Yeah, the Olivet Discourse. And as a resource for you guys, highly recommend the Last Days According to Jesus lectures from R.C. Sproul. That was huge for me, and him dissecting this. And so, Matthew 24, Olivet Discourse. Really, I can't see any way of making sense of that with that particular passage that this generation, and how long is a generation in Hebrew thought? 40 years.
Right.
40
the wilderness.
Years.
Like there's not,
How
you
old
have
is Jesus?
biblical data. You don't need to go look into archaeology.
Yeah.
You've got the numbers are there in Scripture.
In
to tell
Scripture
you.
itself.
Right.
That's right. And then how old is Jesus and his ministry? He's right at 20. He's 30.
Yeah, he's 30.
70 AD. The math is
plain and simple.
Yeah.
Kindergarten.
It's amazing.
Yes.
So in a sense, and real quick on this point, it's really important that we distinguish the claim that we are making with postmillennialism and with this partial preterist. And if you want to understand that more, you just got to go back, and we don't have time in this episode.
We did a whole
go
episode.
back and do that episode. It's great. So what you have to understand is when we're talking about the coming of Jesus, that gets a little confusing, because when you hear the second Jesus coming,
right,
you think second coming, judgment, end of history,
right, which
that will happen.
Yes.
But what the New Testament data seems to indicate is that there are multiple comings, right? So 70 AD is God coming in judgment. And so that is another coming of Christ, right?
Yes.
But it's not the second coming like we think of. And so that was a category shift, because I had never thought of that. I've never considered the possibility that there's another coming of Jesus other than the second coming. But what we're arguing is, in the Olivet Discourse, he says, the Son of Man is coming on the clouds, and it's of this judgment language.
Yeah.
But that would mean that the ultimate judgment, where Christ comes in wrath, happened at 70 AD, and then the kingdom goes forward, and basically the kingdom of heaven grows throughout history. And
imagine setting up your own private family banking system that will guarantee a positive return on your money and have that money grow nonstop and tax protected for the rest of your life and beyond. Sound too good to be true? Welcome to private family banking. Get your hard-earned cash into our safe money system, where you will start earning tax-protected compound interest and create a pool of liquid capital that can be used to grow your wealth in more than one place at the same time. Everyone who becomes part of the private family banking community will receive ongoing coaching and have free access to quarterly client calls, including interaction with investors, entrepreneurs, and other great families. Our long-term goal is to help you educate and train your children and grandchildren to be financially responsible and successful with our privatized banking system, and help you turn post-mill thinking into post-mill action. Email us today at banking@privatefamilybanking.com to schedule a free 30-minute introductory appointment and receive our free ebook entitled How to Build Multi-Generational Wealth Outside of Wall Street and Avoid the Coming Banking Meltdown.
Okay, so now you're going to do your So I'll do mine, and then you can But the last one for me, the third text, then coming perfectly out of what you just said, is go 4 more chapters in Matthew 28, the Great Commission.
Yep.
Go ye into all the world and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you. And I think because of my decisionistic Baptist conversion that I had into Christianity, that was still like who goes down at the Billy Graham crusade was what I was hearing that. And just look at the words. That's what's so hard about Scripture is, can you see what's there? And if you know, I'm preaching again tomorrow, Sunday here, and it's so difficult to just camp out in the text and let it hit you with what it has and not bring your stuff to it. And the plain text there is disciple all the nations, the world. We've made lots of converts of individuals. We've even had some nations, especially you think about like the Germanic tribes as the missionaries are going forth, people that have been converted. Have we discipled a single nation? Is there a nation where you can say, this is a Christian nation, and this is in the news today with all the Christian nationalism. Have we succeeded in discipling a single nation of earth for Jesus Christ?
Teaching them to obey all that I have commanded.
Yeah.
That is, it's so funny because people really struggle with postmillennialism, but in my estimation, it, like I said before, it makes sense of the biblical data, and you have to tie yourself into knots far less with postmillennialism. You just look at the plain, and
but you have to deal with your own junk more about like, I want this world to get nuked and over with and beamed up and be done.
Or not even that I want that. It's that I can't see, I don't have the faith that this broken, crazy world
can be fixed.
Through the proclamation of the gospel and through the teaching of the nations to obey all that Christ has commanded.
Yes.
So it becomes either a lack of faith or, like you said, maybe I'm just a cynical, I'm like done with it.
Yeah.
And to be the most, there's also charitably, there are tons of Christians who I don't see it in the text. It's not that I couldn't have faith. Convince me that it's in the text and then I would. And that was me. I wouldn't have said that before I became post-mill. I would have said, sure, God could do that. But I look at the text and I don't see it. But that's because really postmillennialism hasn't had champions for a century about.
Yeah, right.
It's gone. It went out of vogue in World War I and II when it historically looked like, oh no,
this is the end of the world.
Yeah, this is the end of the world, or the world is not getting better.
Right.
Look at all this craziness, and it really went out of vogue at that point. But really, over the past 2-3 decades, we've begun to see a resurgence, and now I think we're kind of at the ground floor of a real resurgence of postmillennialism. People coming back to the text and saying, wait a second, I actually do see this, and maybe we shouldn't read our newspaper to get our sense of eschatology, our sense of what the end times is going to look like. And so, anyway.
No, but I think they're just reading the Great Commission as and also just being familiar. Here's another thing in the last 20 years is just getting the Old Testament back.
Yeah.
Is that what do you do with Isaiah 11? That the knowledge of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, that the lamb will lay down with the cobra kind of thing, is that this is a picture of Israel being safe with the nations. Animals are always the picture of all these different kinds of tribes of crazy people. And in a BC world, when you have one locus of God's saving activity in one nation, and just literally, it says demons are leading all of these countries. They're under the power of Satan. But Jesus has come and bound the strong man, and now we go out into all the world because it's the millennial reign of Jesus Christ, is that we are going out into all the world, making disciples of all the nations, and that it is how much more peaceable. You just read about the insanity and cannibalism and the horrific might makes right viewpoint that dominated all of planet Earth in BC times, is that it's not where it's going to be. It's not perfect. I'm not claiming that this is all going to be sunshine and roses. I'm not that kind of post-mill, but that it is the discipleship of the nations has started in earnest on every nation and finished on none.
Yeah.
So I would not be surprised if after I die and I get to find out the numbers, because I'm a math guy, that like it's 100,000 more years before Jesus comes back. We're in the early church.
Yeah, I think so.
That's one thing that I think is just can be really stretch and grow your faith to say, can I believe Isaiah 11, Matthew 28, that this is going to happen?
And for all you tempted into that pessimism, I want you to imagine the early Christians getting hunted down by Nero,
fed to
burned
lions.
alive, fed to lions. Imagine they're in the Colosseum where everyone is mocking and jeering at them, where they're going to face their death.
Being called atheists.
Yeah, being called atheists, right? And if you could give them future goggles, right, so that those Christians could see what these, we've got gigantic conferences filled with thousands and thousands of people where the name of Christ is being worshiped.
That statue in Rio of Jesus Christ.
The statue in Rio. If they could see the world where this world today, where the gospel has gone forth and touched every nation just about at this point.
Yeah.
You know,
you get Christmas off in Japan.
That's right. You get Christmas off in Japan. If they could see that, that the gospel is going to the ends of the earth by the millions of people.
Yes.
Well, I think they would be shocked at our pessimism.
Right.
Right. Well, they're facing lions, and we're sitting in a world
after
with
the day
millions
of Pentecost. There were 3,000 of us. There are 3 billion of you.
Wow.
And you're down in the dumps Eeyoring it over here in
right.
the 21st century.
That's right. That's right.